something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. This episode of Devil's Chess Club is available to everyone courtesy of Four Died Trying, the new documentary film series which explores the extraordinary lives and cataclysmic assassinations of JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and RFK. A Patreon page for Four Died Trying is launching soon. It will offer patrons the earliest access to new films and a number of other perks. You can also purchase the Four Died Trying prologue episode on Apple TV and other streaming services. The next chapter, Chapter 1, should be available any day now, I'm told. Please support us on Patreon by subscribing to the American Exception Podcast. You will get access to many episodes of the American Exception Podcast, including the Peter Dale Scott Oral History Series, with new episodes coming this month. Peter is an international treasure. We've begun discussing his lesser-known but very important poem and article about the forgotten Russian 9/11, as well as its connections to the American 9/11 and to so much more. This is fascinating material, the product of a singularly brilliant mind and a number of amazing life experiences. I urge everyone to listen to these by subscribing to the American Exception Podcast on Patreon. Today, Bryce and I give a rundown on recent current events with historical significance, I would say. Then I have a conversation with Tyrel Ventura. Tyrel was formerly the host of Watching the Hawks on RT and is currently the other half of, along with his father, Jesse Ventura's Die First, Then Quit on Substack. Bryce Green, how's the weather in Indiana?
We're still in that climate change spring, so I'm loving it. Not looking forward to the summer though, because it's going to be painful and disgusting and muggy.
Yeah, I in Bloomington, Indiana. I spent a summer with a girlfriend, and we subletted a place with no air conditioning, and that was the end of our relationship.
Yeah.
It was good that we never murdered each other, which was good, but there was no way we were going to survive being in that hot, miserable Bloomington summer with no AC. It was hellish.
Yeah.
So I hope you have air conditioning, right?
Oh yeah. No, I would not be here without air conditioning. I'm a very temperature regulated person. I keep my my house pretty reasonable temperature. Like it's 60, good. Like 64 or something.
Oh, good. You're helping to deal with the energy crisis. So let's talk about the main thing that's on people's minds these days, if you care about international politics, the crisis in Israel and Palestine, crisis in Gaza, the ongoing genocide in Gaza. I just want to point out a couple of articles that have been written recently, and the first one is from The Guardian, so I'm not really that interested in The Guardian spin on it or the content of the article so much, but the headline, the story that it refers to. So U.S. intelligence cast doubt on Israeli claims of UNRWA Hamas links, report says. Intel report says some accusations that aid workers participated in Hamas attacks credible, but could not be independently verified. So this is saying that this whole business of the UN relief, what is it? UN Relief Workers Association? Is that what it stands for?
Relief Works Agency.
Relief Works Agency. Okay. The story was from weeks ago now, I guess, that Israel said, some of these, thousands of people employed by this UN agency ended up being in Hamas and participated in the October 7 attacks. So you should just stop giving food to the people of Gaza and just allow us to starve them to death. They don't say that last part, but that's the crux of it. And now it turns out that that's not something that they can really verify. It's just more or less the flat assertion of the Israeli government. So you followed this story. What does this new wrinkle add other than just more layers of outrage?
I mean, this was the obvious conclusion to anyone who saw this story when it first came. I mean, if you remember when this UNRWA story first dropped by the Israelis, it was directly after the ICJ issued its ruling saying that Israel needs to do everything it can to prevent genocide, and that it was plausibly committing a genocide right now. And so you had that ruling, and then you had uh, some outrage over this alleged connection to terrorism, and it essentially justified Israel's continued assault on Gaza. And then you saw a big jump in this when after the Super Bowl happened, and when they used the festivities to launch an attack into Rafah. And they justified it again by saying that, there are terrorists in there, and now we know that UNRWA was one of them, and they attacked an UNRWA base there, and it was clear propaganda from the beginning, much like the sexual assault story was deployed right after the end of the original ceasefire. This story was deployed right as the ICJ ruling was coming. And it had the predictable effect of forcing these Western governments who are, beholden to Israel to cut funding for UNRWA, which was the only or one of only a few organizations that were actually feeding the Palestinians who are starving. And so I wrote at the time that this story about UNRWA Hamas links was meant to intensify the Israeli campaign of starvation on the Palestinian people. And it did exactly that. And the U.S. did exactly what was expected of them, which was to cut funding for it and intensify that campaign of starvation. But the fact that this is coming out, that they actually could not independently verify the links between UNRWA and Hamas, I mean, it's just obvious. Of course they can't verify the links. And I'm not surprised that some say that they might be credible but can't be independently verified. I mean, that means nothing. Of course, the fact that they think that the Hamas base under Al Shifa was credible and there was intelligence to support that. There's always intelligence to support any conclusion you want if you're an intelligence agency. But if your goal is destruction and death and eradication of the inferior race, well, then this story is very useful for that.
Right. But gaming it out again, I don't understand how it's just more, it's another story. It's another data point that leads to the conclusion that Israel is insane because I think of let's assume that they are going to be successful and keep preventing food and life supporting, assistance from reaching the people in Gaza. Well, if there's mass starvation there and video will emerge of this and so on, this is going to hurt Israel more than those starving Palestinians would. I mean, this is just, it seems more like it's sadistic bullying, genocidal, I don't mean bullying, just genocide. It's a sadistic way to exterminate people, and perform ethnic cleansing, and it's going to be perceived that way if they're successful. So why do they keep doing these things that if they succeed would seem to be clearly damaging to them in the long run if you're soberly thinking about it?
It really just seems like this is just short-term thinking. Like all these stories that are easily debunked and easily refutable, they come out and they make a splash in the Western media, and then by the time it's debunked, the Western media has moved on to something else. You saw this with the story about what happened on October 7th. You saw this with the story of the sexual assault. You saw this with the story of Al Ali Hospital. You saw this with the story of Al Shifa. In each of those cases, there was an obvious effort to influence the major media to push a narrative that is favorable to Israel's point of view, or at least cast doubt on any opposing narrative. And that created the space where they could do what they wanted without uh, criticism from the press corps and from other governments. And by the time that's all done and the dust is settled and the truth comes out, well, you're onto a new news cycle. And so, however bad the actual effects of what they did will be, it doesn't matter because they moved on to something else. I mean, you see it with almost every other major event, major crime in imperial history. You learn about how the Taliban were willing to offer bin Laden up in 2001, but the U.S. just didn't care and wanted to go in anyway. Well, that was true, and it came out around that time, but it didn't make a splash in the major media.
Yeah, it should have been.
So
It should have been something that they talked about. They should have talked about it nonstop. If they don't, then the story just goes away. And then there's just a few like politics nerds who will say like, excuse me, did you know that? And then what do you even do with that information? And it's like that across the board, as you're saying.
Exactly. Like you can tell somebody. I made a comment a while ago to a friend. I was like, it actually doesn't matter what happened. It actually doesn't matter what happened on October 7th. It doesn't matter who bombed this hospital. It doesn't matter if UNRWA and Hamas are linking arms or if they're not. Israel said it. They created it. They spoke it into existence. And as MC Rove said, we're the empire. You get to make your own reality. And that's what they're doing. And you can use that. You can use that simple bullying power to bully the media to create the narrative conditions where you can get what you want. And
except they can't, though. I don't think they can. They're losing that ability to the Rovian doctrine or whatever no longer really holds because the rest of the world isn't buying it. I mean, there was that UN vote, and the most recent one where the U.S. vetoed ceasefire in Gaza, and Britain abstained. So the only two countries that were not voting in favor of this, the permanent members and the temporary members, it was the pinnacle of white power, the Atlanticist white power movement, known as you suck, USUK. I mean, that's it. Like, it's so nakedly just a bunch of white people saying like, please, don't stop killing these brown people. It's the rest of the world sees that, and I don't think that they can unsee it at this point. And the more things that they do like this, it's just adding to the problem. But I want to get into I want to talk about another story that's related. This one's from Pepe Escobar, and it's a good encapsulation of the current situation. And he has these good kind of big picture things. Occasionally, Pepe's I'm friendly with Pepe. We've had him on in the past, and he always writes good articles like this. Sometimes he goes off in areas that I'm a little wary to go. I mean, he seems to like the Dugin guy a little bit, or at least think he's worth looking at, that Russian sort of fascist metaphysician or something. But set that aside, his reporting is very good in general and very useful. So I like Pepe. NATO's cosmic humiliation. So this one is axis of resistance from Donbass to Gaza, and it really relates these the commonalities here. The resistance in Donbass and Gaza share an essential common vision, overthrowing the unipolar hegemon that has quashed their national aspirations. So I think that this is a relevant way to look at it, and these two crisis points are very important, and there's a lot of people dying, but in the process, they are, I think, bringing closer the end of the unipolar empire, which really is the Western imperialism being eclipsed by something different. NATO's cosmic humiliation and progress in the steppes of Novorossiya. That's the sort of the Donbass, the part of Ukraine that's ethnically Russian, right? Marred by the Anglo-American Zionist combo sleepwalking into a larger conflagration throughout West Asia, frantically insisting they don't want war while bombing every axis of resistance vector except Iran. In parentheses, they can't because Pentagon and has gamed all scenarios and they all spell out doom for the U.S. Scratch the veneer of who's in power in Kiev and Tel Aviv and who pulls their strings, and you'll find some of the same puppet masters controlling Ukraine, Israel, U.S., UK, and nearly all NATO members. The oligarchy of Western imperialism. Now he points out he's talking about a recent conference, and a member of the Palestinian National Council named Nasser Al-Qidwa spoke there, and he's a former foreign minister of foreign affairs or Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Palestinian Authority. And he said that these three positions that Israel have had were all aimed at maintaining a crazy status quo. The first one is that Tel Aviv seeks to maintain the split between Gaza and the occupied West Bank. The second is that they seek to weaken and strengthen one or the other, Gaza or the West Bank, preventing national leadership and using force and only force to suppress Palestine's national rights, preventing a political solution. And the third is that they have been actively pursuing normalization with Arab countries before dealing with the Palestinian issue in a way to disappear the Palestinian question. Okay. Now, he also says the demise of these goals leads to other likely outcomes. Now, these goals are now no longer tenable because Netanyahu has been prolonging this war to save himself politically, and the consequences of this are going to play out in different ways. So this leads to other likely outcomes: a new Israeli government, new Palestinian leadership, and a new Hamas. He sees this changing fundamental facts in these both sides. This will imply rounds with a new Israeli government forced to develop a peace framework. The end result must be the minimum acceptable to the international community. So based on all of those UN resolutions in the past that have tried to lay the framework for a two-state solution, 1967 borders, mutual recognition, and a timeline, maybe 2027, for example. It must establish commitments respected from the beginning, something the Oslo crowd couldn't possibly fathom. So no one from West Asia to Russia is holding their breath, especially as Israeli extremism prevails. Okay, and then there's a leadership vacuum in the Palestinian Authority. And of course, there's an absence of American mediation, which is the elephant in the room. The fact that the U.S. will side with Israel in blocking any solution, even as it says, oh, we support a two-state solution. We support Palestinian rights to a nation state. The resistance war is a global one. This is Pepe sort of wrapping it up here. The resistance war is a global one, played out so far in only 2 battlefields, but their state supporters are formidable players on today's global chessboard and are slowly racking up victories in their respective domains, all while the enemy, the hegemon, the USA, is in economic free fall, lacks domestic mandates for its wars, and offers zero solution. Whether in the muddy black soil of Donbass, the Mediterranean shores of Gaza, or the world's essential shipping waterways, Hamas, Hezbollah, Hashd al-Shabaab, and Ansarallah will take all the time they need to turn epicenters of pain into epicenters of hope, meaning that these epicenters of pain are the way that they used to describe here. I think it was Lavrov talked about this, the Russian foreign minister. Epicenters of pain being where all these people are dying in eastern Ukraine and in Gaza, and that because this is a part of the unwinding of U.S. hegemony and the unipolar era, which is the really faded largely anyway, there's hope to be seen in all of this disaster. Okay, so what do you think of what do you make of this analysis? I do think that the Palestinian Observer is correct that whatever they were working on before about the status quo and maintaining that apartheid status quo and meanwhile normalizing relations with Iran, I mean, this is basically what Sam Husseini was talking about with us. And it does seem that they can't go back to this status quo, and it also seems that prolonging this war is in Netanyahu's interests. And this Netanyahu project goes back to at least the 90s and the assassination of Rabin. It's obsessed with Greater Israel. We all see, and I think that this is ultimately going to be the thing that makes the Greater Israel dream impossible. Ironically, but what do you make of this?
Yeah, well, I do think that I don't know if the Greater Israel dream was ever possible. But I do think that now, based on what Israel has done over the last 5 months, has made it almost completely unattainable. The situation before October 7th was that these governments were planning to normalize relations with Israel as part of the remnants of the Trump-led Abraham Accords and the normalization deal that was essentially designed to buy off the Palestinians by giving them, tens of billions of dollars in, development loans designed to make a capitalist class there. and that was where things were headed. And the only thing that changed that was, the current war, the current escalation, and the threat of a wider war in the broader Middle East region. And they're unable to go back because they've already done too much damage. They've done too much damage to their reputation, but also they've done too much damage to Gaza. And so that the state of calm that had existed between Hamas and Israel, and the Gaza Strip in Israel, well, that's, you're unable to do that. They've condemned themselves to, if they don't find a permanent ceasefire solution to this, to an endless insurgency that they really have no hope of quelling. Like they don't have the capability to undo Hamas's network of fighters and tunnels, and they don't have the ability to actually wage a counterinsurgency war in Gaza. At least not without a cost that would be entirely too high for the Israeli people to stomach. And so they've put themselves in a bind in which that they've foregone any chance of a prolonged calm, the slow constriction of the Palestinians with the apartheid. And they've basically said that, well, if it's not our final solution, which Linda Thomas Greenfield did actually use those words, so that means we can start using it now. If it's not going to be the final solution, well, then it's going to be some solution, and it'll either be, and they can't do endless war forever. That's untenable. So they're going to have to find a way to coexist with Palestinians, whether it be through internal forms of, an internal class of sane people in Israel who then get control of the government after Netanyahu exits stage right, or it'll be imposed internationally. And the longer and longer this goes, the more and more they are building a consensus in the entire rest of the world against them. And they're raising the likelihood that some sort of solution will be imposed that's different than the final solution that they want.
Right. And that the final solution that they've been pursuing is quite horrific, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it now. There's a lot of things in recent decades that pointed to the fact that the logic on the ground was pointing to this being the only real long-term outcome that they must be pursuing. And then it was like, can you believe what you see or not? And yet everybody wanted to deny it. But now, after the way that they use the October 7 attacks as a pretext, and then the more that we learn about how the people that were the civilians, quote unquote, that were massacred were on the night of October 7 or on October 7, that these were most likely killed. Most of them seem to have been killed by Israeli friendly fire, or at least a large number of them. It just all seems ghastly and illegitimate and criminal, and it doesn't seem. It seems to be the end point of a failed campaign for decades that that historians are going to be trying to unpack for a while. I mean, as we think about these U.S. bastions in Iraq and Syria being overrun, we start thinking like, why are they there in the first place? They certainly are. They do seem to be relevant to this destruction of Gaza and the position of Israel right now. I mean, was that the reason that there was so much pressure to keep them there in the first place? It doesn't exactly make sense as just taking Syrian oil, and then the Iraqis are signing all sorts of oil contracts with China and so on. So then,
and they're also trying to kick the U.S. Forces
and they're
out.
Right, they're asking them to leave. The U.S. line is supposedly that they are there to fight ISIS, but if ISIS is such a danger that only the U.S. can protect Iraq from, why is Iraq saying please leave? I mean, this is something that people are going to have to unpack for a long time. The last thing I want to talk about here, in passing, is a couple of different stories, but only one of them I really have the headline for, but the other part's related. Question in Beirut: will the Syrians, Saudis, Iranians strike a new Lebanon deal? And this is also from the Cradle, which people should check out for Middle East news. And this is interesting because a former Lebanese PM went to Beirut and was speaking with, basically the upshot is there's a potential reconciliation between the Saudi government and Syria, and that this may be a way of stabilizing Lebanon, and it may point to even more cooperation among the rest of the countries in the Middle East. I think the Saudi position is interesting because they still do things that like suggest that they're friendly to the U.S., but then in other ways they haven't been. I kind of think that they are doing the old, Nasser, things like old Nasser and Lumumba did, where at times they would try to play the sides against each other. That seems to be what they're doing, and that they probably feel unsafe in terms of just totally standing up to the U.S. But I have to believe that the logic of what the multipolar world is offering for these countries will prevail, because you could have the Middle East run by the people of the Middle East, not this Western colonial transplant project. Like it seems so clear that they're ultimately, once it's safe, going to break on the side of China, Russia, Iran. But this is, I think, noteworthy.
Yeah, I agree. It's strange because Saudi Arabia has typically been thought of as one of the big partners in the Anglo-American global imperium. We always think of like the Saudi oil connection as being critical in America's and the UK's role in the Middle East. The House of Saud, but over time they seem to be developing their own self-interest. Then they've seemed to determine that self-interest no longer lies exclusively with the United States. It seems that especially with the Chinese Saudi Iran normalization deal, that the Saudis see what we've been talking about, which is the decline of the unipolar order, and they're trying to figure out, well, how can we maintain our this House of Saud, this wealth, this privilege in this changing order. And so it seems like they're taking one foot out of the U.S. Anglo camp and putting it into the the BRICS camp. I mean, they are talking about, if they haven't already, officially joining BRICS, and I want to say they already have.
They have,
And
I believe, and it was weird because there were some articles that tried to kind of dissemble about this that were out there, like trying to sort of obscure the fact that. So there were some strange news feeds or news items that would equivocate about this. But my understanding is that they actually did join.
Hmm. I think you're correct, and you're seeing this manifest in things like, its position on the current Gaza war. Like, while they're still allowing the United States to use their airspace to run their bombings on the Houthis, the bombings that, by the way, Joe Biden says aren't working, but they will continue anyway. But the Saudis have also said that they are cautioning the U.S. to restrain itself. They're coming out against the U.S.'s actual escalation plan. They're calling for de-escalation in the region, along with Iran, along with all these other regional powers. And so again, you don't have it going in lockstep with the U.S. and Israel. You have it charting its own path while still, giving a little bit to the United States by allowing them to continue their bombing run. So I think over time you're going to see more and more of these compromises. But I think over time they're going to be more and more in favor of the emerging multipolar world order and less in favor of the United States. Now that could be pretty dangerous. I mean, we know that Saudi Arabia is, definitely willing to threaten to do 9/11 on people if they don't get their way.
I don't know who that. I'm not sure that that's Saudi Arabia though. That was Bandar Bush, and I think that was the old Khashoggi Bush American deep state. In action. I don't. I mean, it was Saudi Arabia, obviously, but I think that the composition at the top has changed. Because I mean, what happened to the other Khashoggi? Like they killed him. Because he was perceived as an American. Yeah, the nephew, right, of Adnan Khashoggi. They chopped him up. Probably because he was guilty of treason and it was treasonously conspiring with U.S. intelligence. I mean, I'm not saying they should have chopped him up. I'm anti-chopping of people, but that he was probably treasonous.
Yeah, I mean, the internal political struggles of like Saudi Arabia is definitely an area that I'm not as attuned to, and I think we should find somebody sometime to come and brief us on how the composition of the House of Saud has changed since, the Bandar Prince Turki days to like the MBS days of today.
Right.
But
Yeah,
either
it is
way, there's
fascinating and
going
it
to be
is
adapting.
changing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the last thing I do want to mention here is Lula, who was a guy that a lot of people on the American left were like saying, "Oh, he's too much of a compromiser, he doesn't." And then he got thrown in jail, through lawfare, which to me says that like, these leaders, if you're a leader in a statesman in any country, you have to accommodate these oligarchic darker forces. And people were saying, "Oh, Lula's not doing enough," but like whatever he did was enough to get him thrown in jail. It reminds me of like JFK when people are saying like he didn't do enough, but like he did enough to get himself killed. It's like it's very very difficult to be a statesman in a place with a corrupt political economy, which under capitalism is most every political economy, because it's really all about securing your rackets and such. But he's now out of jail. He was reelected, and he is really a leading figure in third world nationalism today. I think what you'd call third world nationalism, the global South, the emerging new multipolar world order. And so Brazil has broken off diplomatic relations with Israel, as I understand it, and he has compared what's happening in Gaza. Lula has compared what's happening in Gaza to the Holocaust. So this is a very big, important country in the world, and so I think this is significant. What do you make of Lula's positions here?
Well, I mean, it just seems like he's definitely trying to take a leadership position in this, this third world nationalist movement, this resurgent part of the multipolar order that's being shaped before our eyes. Now, I have noticed that you're right. There are a lot of leftists, both in America and elsewhere, who have criticized Lula for being sort of accommodationist with some of the oligarchic elements in Brazil and not being as forceful in his condemnation of some of the more colonial elements of, American policy and others. But you're right. Like he got himself arrested. He does function as a major opposition to the Brazilian oligarchy, but also the global oligarchy. I mean, like the things that they say about him, you'd think that he was like a rabid murderer or something, but like no, he's just an indigenous working class guy who rose to the top, and so that's a major threat. But there are fair critiques you could make against Lula, as in like why wasn't he the one who brought a case against Israel in the ICJ? Why did he?
I do think that South Africa she should have joined in different. He could have joined in different ways. It would have been better. But I do think South Africa was the perfect country to do it for what it's worth.
There is a case for that.
That's good to know. I mean, that's really momentous. I mean, that they are acting this way. The rest of the world it's to me, it's just fascinating because I've been preoccupied with the U.S. foreign policy in this era, in the post-war world, looking at how we've crushed third world nationalism. And in Kennedy's case, he tried to make it a little better in every place, and he realized the Cold War was the real big problem, and he tried to address that. And then he dies, and then it goes back to the more neo-colonial business, and that's how it's been ever since in different ways. The end of the Cold War just made it worse because the U.S. was even more unhinged. And now it does remind me, I'm sorry to be a Kennedy dork here, but like when he gave his speech about freedom, or he said like the most powerful force in the world, mankind's desire to be free and independent. Okay, like it sort of sounds like corny liberal propaganda in a way. But it really it could be that way if you're saying like free and independent, and what you have in mind is like Milton Friedman neoliberal freedom. But that really wasn't what he was saying. He was speaking about third world nationalism, and it is now it hasn't been extinguished. Not the period of IMF, structural adjustment reforms and everything else. You can't crush people's will to want to live and be free and prosperous.
I think that's the core of why I'm such an optimist on the long arc of history. Like empires fall, and greater empires than the ones that exist now have fallen. However you want to measure great, but the fact is that there will always be people on the ground to build something up again, and that desire to be free, that desire to be, you're free of any oppression. That's a very human tendency that will exist regardless of whatever the current despotism is, regardless of whatever king, president, ruler, master, empire. That's just a human tendency, and as they can stamp it out for 10,000 years, but it can't be that. It won't be that forever, and so that's why we have to keep plugging along, keep doing the work, educating ourselves, learning about the world, and maybe exploiting the opportunities that exist.
Well, I hope that we can continue to do that, and I hope that we can arm some people with some information here with all these broadcasts. And Bryce, before I'm gonna cut to a interview now that I did with Tyrel Ventura, talking about his days at RT and the state of the media in general, and a number of other topics. But I want to thank you again, as always. It's great discussing world events with you.
And it's great discussing world events with you as well, Aaron.
Tyrel Ventura, great to have you here today.
Hey, great to be here today. Thank you so much for having me on this on your podcast. A big fan of the work you guys have been doing on the JFK conspiracy and the research there. You guys have always been a really interesting voice. You're a great author. It's a pleasure and honor to be on with you today.
Well, thank you so much for the kind words. And you should know that I followed you for a while back in the day when you were on RT. There was a golden age of RT for a while when you had Abby there and you guys were there. What are your reflections now? Because you have to go to like Rumble or Odyssey to watch RT. And I was actually on RT earlier this week with Peter Kuznick talking about Ukraine, and that was cool on Crosstalk. But what are your reflections? Because the RT America shut down totally, and you were there until the end. So now, a couple of years ago have passed. What are your reflections on that whole time period?
Doing the show itself, watching the Hawks with Sean Stone, Tabitha Wallace, Amisha, who kind of came in the last year or so of the show. Doing that show itself was an absolute blast. I had worked 3 years in 2010 to about 2013, 2012 on the conspiracy theory show with Jesse Ventura. And then as that show ended, I had kind of started me and Sean went over to like a YouTube channel that was already in operation called the Lip TV and they'd kind of approached us about.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I called Buzzsaw, and they had approached us and said like, hey, do you want to do a show? We really liked what you guys did on conspiracy theory. Would you guys want to do kind of an interview political talk show there? And we kind of developed the show Buzzsaw that we did for about a year. And through doing that show, we had gotten the attention of RT America and Abby Martin. And I had gone out to do an appearance on her show, Breaking the Set. And while I was there, we kind of started talks about, would you guys want to come to DC and kind of do a show for us similar to what you're already doing online, talking about political issues, interviews, things like that. And
this is RT asking you to.
Yeah, this is RT America.
Not Abby.
Not Abby. No, this was RT America kind of coming to because they just watched the performance on Abby's show and the interview that I gave there, and this guy's interesting.
Her show was great. Abby's the coolest.
Yeah, it was a fun show, and so in those talks we kind of start. Then that's what I was working with Tabitha Wallace on Buzzsaw along with Sean Stone, and they said we want to bring the three of you to Washington to kind of start this new idea and hatch a show. And so I remember the first thing that the three of us had said to them was, well, we're interested in it, obviously, but we have to have complete journalistic freedom. Like we don't want to be told at the beginning of each day what topics we're to talk about and what topics we're not supposed to talk about, because I'm like my dad. I can't abide by that. And me and my father had a really, really rough time with that back in, I want to say 2003, 2004, if memory serves me correctly.
Oh yeah, the MSNBC
with the MSNBC show. Yeah, because that was a interesting dive into cable news. And so when I didn't know a lot about RT America at that time, I knew that they were connected to the Russian government and some in their financing, and essentially my understanding was it was just kind of Russia's version of the BBC, to a degree, or their version of CNN or whatever, and so, one of my big, after the experiences I had at MSNBC, I was like, cable news, well, as long as you give me the journalistic freedom to discuss what we find interesting and what we find newsworthy, we're on board. And they said, of course, that's why we want you guys, and we won't mess with that. And so, yeah, we decided to take the deal and relocate from Los Angeles. Me and Tabitha Wallace relocated from Los Angeles to DC. Sean stayed behind because we kind of fashioned an interesting role for him on the show as well. And we started operations there and put together Watching the Hawks, and the producers and the crew, the teams that we had on Watching the Hawks it was a fun show to make. It's doing live TV every day at 6 p.m. And it's a little like doing live theater to a degree. Like you got to put the stories together, find out who you're going to talk to, and then literally go live every day for a half hour and hope that you're making sense and hoping that you're we kind of went in with the idea of, look, we don't want to make people think like us. We just want to make people think. And there's a plethora of news stories out there that affects us, especially as Americans, on a day-to-day way that nobody really wants to talk about or ignore, whether that be, corporate crimes or financial crimes or, mechanisms, the military-industrial complex influencing American foreign policy. There's a lot of stories out there beyond, who killed Lacey Peterson, or the more kind of tabloid-esque journalism that you see on a day-to-day basis, or as we learned from MSNBC, the 5 to 7 stories that are kind of all agreed upon by every network and every news organization that this is what we're talking about today, and you do not deviate from those 5 or 6 stories. You can have different opinions of those stories, but you can't not do those stories.
Well, yeah, and you can have different opinions within a certain range of opinions.
Exactly.
But, yeah. They were at that time. RT did have shows that were better to watch than. I mean, the cable news is unwatchable. I can't watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox News I can't even do it for anthropological research anymore. I very easily. But you guys, it was between Watching the Hawks and Breaking the Set, and I think Afshin Ratansi was on there. He was pretty good, right?
Yeah, he worked out of I think RT UK and had a good. I think still has a pretty good show going on over there. It was an interesting dynamic too in that newsroom, because when we got there, Abby was, I think, kind of just finishing up her run with Breaking the Set, because our show actually started right after her show finished.
Yeah, I think there was a little overlap where she was there for a little bit, maybe a year or something. You might remember.
I had actually guest hosted her show a couple times, if I remember correctly, because I think she was. I can't speak to what the reasons why or anything like that, but I think she was just kind of wanting to go back west and work out of LA again. And so we had kind of picked up that slot after she had left, and we were already scheduled to do a show anyway. It just kind of worked conveniently of like, okay, well, Abby's wrapping up Breaking the Set. Why don't you guys slide into that same spot? I guess they kind of looked at it. It's like, wow, they're all the young kids who are,
and you guys were more on the left too, which I mean, sort of left liberal perspective, generally speaking, but
in a general sense, not an establishment Democratic Party sense, but
I don't mean liberal like that's one of the weirdest words in politics today, and it can mean a bazillion different things. But I mean more of like, you weren't full-on Marxist ideology dialectic all the time, but you were, left critics of empire,
and we kind of looked at it
corruption.
Exactly, and we kind of looked at it like, we as hosts of a news show or a debate talk show, political commentary show, you have your kind of beliefs and morals that you stand by, but we're very, we weren't afraid to have people on that countered our opinions on things. In fact, we liked that. But our thing was really just, we have to find stories that are important that people should know about. And that was our really kind of marching orders. And that could cover things from pop culture, that could cover things from, insider politics in Washington. It could cover a wide range of things, but just things that people should be looking at in a new way, or at least, and I remember also too, in terms of like how we would handle different political ideologies and things like that, is we kind of accepted all to at least have people on, even if my political belief system was wildly against theirs. One of the things I wanted to cultivate that my co-hosts as well was part of the problem with cable news and how we discuss news today is it's turned into ESPN. It's very much my team versus your team, or my set of beliefs versus your set of beliefs, and we're going to yell and argue with each other all day long, and you're tuning in to see the fight. Where we kind of I looked at it and said, the times that I have been influenced politically, the times that I've been like had one set of ideas about what's, a piece of history or a current political belief, and then had my mind changed, didn't come from getting into a fucking drag out argument with somebody. It came from the exchange of facts and a polite conversation. Usually you're sitting around a dinner table, you're sitting at a bar with your friends or something, someone brings somebody up and you talk it out, And so we kind of looked at it and definitely made it made a decision on that show to say, look, we'll have a lot of different viewpoints on the show, but we don't want it to sit and be a fight. We'd rather have it be a discussion of ideas. So that way the viewer at home isn't tuning in to watch, an ESPN brawl over whether LeBron is better than Michael or whatever. They're tuning in to like actually look at like, okay, well, why do these belief systems exist? Why do you believe what you believe? Here's what I believe. Let the viewer take home from that what they will, and let them think for themselves. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like I said, we didn't want people to think like us. We just wanted to make people think, because there's a very serious lack of that, tragically, in modern discourse and politics.
Right, and with the RT approach, and this goes from my experience with Sputnik too. I do John Kiriaku's show pretty regularly on there, and even if you're thinking like, well, I don't like this Russian spin or whatever, a lot of it was people like you, or you have people like Lee Camp or Abby Martin,
Chris Hedges.
That were able to, Chris Hedges for a time, that were able to have shows where they talk about things that you would never be allowed to talk about on the corporate media. And if people just would look objectively at like, okay, what is RT reporting on? Why is this so worrisome for the powers that be? And what does it say that they're so worried about these things? Because their approach is basically to tell people important and true stories. It's not to make up things and say like, oh, look, America is doing all of these horrible things which are not true. It was basically like, here are the stories that the corporate media is not going to tell you. Mm-hmm. And the corporate media response and the corporate political establishment's response is like, well, we can't have this. We have to shut this place down. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, it was an interesting pushback, because when I got there wasn't as much animosity towards it. You'd have
what year was it? Do you remember?
About 2014, 2015.
Was it before the Maidan thing, or?
It was kind of coming off of that a little bit.
Okay.
But even then, there still wasn't, like, there was definitely bad blood in the political establishment of the U.S. towards RT, but it wasn't. It didn't reach this like fevered crescendo where you had like the CIA writing up reports on how we're, information propagandists for Russia trying to influence U.S. elections and shit like that. Like, it hadn't reached that level of boiling point. When I got there, you had a lot of different political ideologies in that newsroom. You did have hardcore, like, super Marxist types. You had hardcore right wing, what became MAGA types. Like, like you definitely had a garden of political thought going on there. And, I would say there was a certain point, definitely towards the end of my time there, that I did feel a change from we're accepting all ideas to kind of going in one certain direction. And I don't know, and it was definitely more a right leaning,
Yeah.
much more right direction.
They had a
politically
few
right.
people that were had been there for a while. Like I don't remember when Hedges left, but you had Hedges in camp. I mean, I guess until they shut down, I think that was when Hedges left RT, right? Like
Yeah,
at the same time you did. So
yes, yeah.
But
they
did go more to the right. They did keep some of these old people around, but they went kind of in a nasty way.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was because of a political belief system at play, or they were kind of looking at the landscape saying, oh, we're getting more eyeballs that way.
Or
meaning that like
geopolitics, maybe it seemed like Trump and MAGA represented a potential way to shift U.S. policy towards Russia. Maybe it was as simple as that.
But even then, I can't say it was that, because I never felt the hand of, we're Russia trying to dictate where we want American policy to go. I never felt that influence at all. If anything, I would say the opposite. If anything, I felt more, just to be bluntly honest, there was a lot of disorganization.
Yeah.
If it was,
that did seem to be
we kind of joked
there
internally between ourselves that, when all of that was really reaching a crescendo, we were kind of joking internally between like me and the Hawks team of like, and a few other people, just like, dude, if they think this is like an organized propaganda machine, then we're there. What the fuck? Because it's like, this is the most disorganized newsroom I've seen in a long time. Like there was a lot of and disorganized in the sense of just corporate disorganization, not really knowing, it was just a lot of kind of mess, on a executive level, not so much on the production level, but
it just shows how there's no way you can get a budget to do kind of anti-establishment things in the United States as far as the media goes, because it was still among the better material that was being put out by the media at that time. And some of it I think was dumb luck on their part that they became kind of popular because their idea is like, we're going to hire a bunch of beautiful women.
Yeah, and there was a lot of decision making that I saw at times where it's kind of like, you guys are more interested in the aesthetic than you are in the message.
Yeah.
And you're trying to compete with the aesthetics. Like I felt that there was a lot more, effort put into creating the aesthetic that we look like CNN and MSNBC than in the content of the stories. There was a lot of that. Because there wasn't, like I said, there was a lot of disorganization there, and there wasn't, like I said, I never once felt the hand of Moscow coming in saying,
yeah, that's what everybody says. That's what
it was never anything like that. I mean, the time, I'll put it like this: the times that you'd go in every morning to the news director and say, okay, these are the topics we're going to cover today. As a normal process of, they need to know, not out of like a creepy way. It's organizing your daily shows. What's each show going to talk about, just so we have all the information, we know what's happening on our channel. And this wasn't talking to Moscow. I barely ever talked to Moscow, if ever. I think, in my time there, was all the, heads of RT America. You'd go in and say like, okay, we're going to talk about like X, Y, and Z today. I think those are some good stories that we are really responding to. And the only times I've had stories where they said, oh, can you not talk about that story? It wasn't because they were worried about the content of the story being damaging or being dangerous politically, or not in line with, the news director's belief system or whatever. Mostly it was because, hey, I've got like 5 other shows doing that same topic. Can you guys find something else just so it's not the same topic the entire night? Unless it was obviously like some world-breaking event or something like that. But, most of the time on a day-to-day basis, if you did change a story, it wasn't because of like manipulative reasons. It was literally just like programming reasons. It's like, Hedges, camp, and, the news are all covering that. Like, don't make it your main story of the day. See if you can find something else. There's other news out there.
Yeah. So how did that compare to, Conspiracy Theory? You did that show for 2 seasons, was it? And
3 seasons. Yeah.
3 seasons. And it was fairly popular, and then it got what I tend to think it was too it was just hitting too close to home for the establishment, like, because some of them were, I didn't see every one of them, but I think I saw a lot of them. And which shows do you remember the most fondly, and why do you think why it got canceled? That's a 2-part question.
Ooh, good question. The shows that, on it, and you'll appreciate this, one of my top favorite shows I ever did there was the JFK show.
Yeah.
That was in the 2nd season. And that show was very important to Jesse. And I was just producing then. I wasn't in front of the camera at that point. And that show was important. I knew how important that subject matter is to my dad. So we, as producers on that show, we really wanted to get that right for him.
Yeah.
And in putting together that show where we, had Jesse up with the Mannlicher Carcano rifle and, and simulated the shots and to the exact distance that they would have occurred, and seeing if Jesse, who is an expert marksman trained by
much better than Oswald.
Much better than Oswald, yeah. Seeing Jesse struggle to duplicate Oswald's shots was amazing. Talking with
he couldn't. Nobody could.
Right, talking with
he couldn't
St.
even
John
do it
Hunt.
like the actual firing it fast enough.
He couldn't. He was
seems to
having
be
trouble.
what's happened to many people. Like they're like, it's impossible.
Yeah, it was the exact rifle. It wasn't a replica. It was one of the rifles made in that time. It was of the same group that went out, that were sold in that era. And he couldn't. And he also said this too. The other difficulty with it too was we had the same scope that Oswald had, right?
It was misaligned, right? The scope,
it was misaligned, and also just the nature of the scope. Jesse told me after he got to the ground, he said, when you go to put the next shell in, you do that, he said you naturally lose sight of your target.
Yeah.
And these targets were standing still, right? Yeah. This wasn't even a moving car, and he says you lose sight, and the scope is so small, like your window when you look through that scope is such a narrow hole. That like you can't, it's hard to realign. It takes seconds just to get realigned with where your target is. And that really solidified it to him. That, and talking to St. John Hunt, who gave us his father's deathbed confessions tapes, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, we were probably the first mainstream show.
Rolling Stone did an article on, but I don't remember any shows doing it.
No, where we actually played the audio and talked to Hunt about that. And it was we featured Fletcher Prouty on that show. There was a lot of stuff at that time.
Interviews, though. He died in 2000.
Yeah, we had gotten excerpts from his interviews that, again,
you get him from Len Osanic.
Yeah, from Len Osanic.
He's great.
Yeah. And so we did a lot with that show that I was a lot to be proud of. And as a son, my dad took me to see JFK when it came out in the theaters, and it was always
I saw it in the theater too.
Yeah, and I was 12, 11 years old, whenever that was, and I knew that was so important to Dad. And so when we finished that episode and I was able to bring him the final cut of the show before it went to air, and he was able to watch it, and seeing him feel so proud of that work and proud of what we put forward was a great moment between a father and a son. It was like, here, Dad, we really worked hard to make this work. And he just, it was a beautiful moment between us. So that was definitely one of my top favorite shows. My other probably top favorite show that we did, there was a lot. There was a lot I didn't like either. But there was, my other favorite one I did was probably the Skinwalker Ranch show. Because that was just a weird place to this day.
How does the conspiracy theory thing work into
man, that's a whole nother level of weirdness. We didn't want to get into aliens and all of that because my dad was kind of there's a lot of other people that do work there. I'm not interested in it, but we kind of through Robert Bigelow and kind of looking at the connections of the U.S. government and him in that time that later now we found out was all actually accurate. But then just being there and seeing the weird shit that I did there that sounds crazy. I can't explain what I saw there, but it definitely wasn't normal to things that I've seen in my life. It was definitely abnormal. I can't say I saw aliens or a UFO, but I can say that I saw some shit there that I can't explain to this day. And just being a part of, I'm a skeptic to a certain degree. And whenever you go into the woods with a camera to find Bigfoot, you're never going to shoot Bigfoot. Come on. But just me being there and then seeing something that I can't explain at a place where they say unexplainable things happens all the time, and then having that verified in my own, wow, I can't explain what I just saw, and experienced. That was a weird moment in life to have something like that happen, because I didn't go in expecting that whatsoever. Now, of course, your audience is like, oh shit, man, Tyrel's into that. No, but it was a weird moment. So that also was an interesting show. Now, the second part of your question, why did conspiracy theory go off the air? I think the predominant reason, we were getting great ratings, we did good shows. When we set out to do the show, interestingly enough, we wanted to have both pro and con for each conspiracy represented.
Yeah.
But what we found out was, even in that era, before kind of the term conspiracy theory and a lot of what we talk about became kind of part of the national zeitgeist the way it is today, nobody on the side debunking conspiracies wanted to come on the show, even before we had ever aired an episode. And we're saying, no, we're going to give you a platform to contradict what they're saying, and we want to see those contradictions so the audience can make up their own mind. No, we won't touch it. Fuck you guys, basically. So then we're like, all right, well, if you don't want to come on, then we're just going to go the other way.
They don't get a lot of media invites either. I mean, that to me just says that like they're doing jobs of some kind. I mean, people
it was
Gerald Posner.
Like we got Bugliosi on for the JFK episode, and he threw a hissy fit. He decided that he would only accept X questions in advance. And him and Jesse were friends because Jesse was a big fan of Helter Skelter book, and they had known each other. And this
have you read Chaos?
I have read Chaos, and so is Jesse now too. So it's like
he's like, man, I was wrong about Bugliosi.
Oh yeah, but and then his mind changed completely about Bugliosi once he read Bugliosi's book on the Kennedy assassination. But prior to that, they had been friendly. They had talked about Manson and things like that. And
he did work on the RFK case, which now I wonder if he was there to fuck it up. In retrospect, because
it was a fascinating, weird moment seeing those two who were very cordial with each other kind of end their friendship in doing that show. Because Jesse, we wanted to get somebody to challenge Jesse and to get Jesse essentially to fight, stand by his beliefs. And Bugliosi just totally was a mess with that.
Was he in the final cut? I can't remember.
I think he was, briefly, but it became such a mess that was like, well, we can't put this on the air because it's just he was just yelling and just didn't even want to debate, and it just became kind of a moot point, Jim
Diogenio's takedown of Bugliosi's book, which I don't know how the hell he found the motivation to do what he did with that, but it is really brilliant and pretty comprehensive. And goes through so many things. I won't say everything because Bugliosi's book is like 1,000 pages long if you add in the CD-ROMs. But he went over that. He went over the whole thing, and Bugliosi was just people don't know if he wrote the thing. People suspect he probably had help because who the hell would write that?
Well, and also too, at the time he was facing, I don't know if while he was writing the book, I can't, my memory's a little hazy, but I know when we had talked to him, part of the reason that he wanted all these questions in advance, which we were sympathetic to, was that he was also going through, I think, early Alzheimer's or something. He had some memory issues coming up.
Yeah.
And at least that's what we were told, and so we were trying to respect that. But it's like Jesse, he only answered these questions, which is like, well, he's my friend. I'm still going to ask him hard questions. Okay, cool. All right, do your thing, man. It definitely, whether or not he wrote that book, depending on where he was at, and I don't want to trample on somebody's grave just because I disagree with him on Kennedy or anything like that, or the other shit. I'm not that kind of person.
I think for Manson, though, he's pretty much compromised.
Oh no, I agree. That was Chaos was a hell of a book. Like that was definitely one of those like, whoa, but yeah, so I don't know. Did he have help writing that book? In my experience, and just the brief little bit I did, I have to say yes. Because it's like I don't have evidence of that, but I just like the guy that I was talking to and dealing with I can't see how he could have put down 1,000 pages. It just seemed really bizarre.
They're making a documentary. Earl Morris is on Chaos.
Really? Ooh, that's
which is. I mean, Earl Morris. I found him kind of an annoying liberal dude in some ways, like the liberal critique of war, like the liberal Democrats sort of perspective, and the stuff he did on JFK was really terrible. But Wormwood was surprisingly good.
Yeah.
And if he's doing Chaos, I don't see how you read Chaos. I mean, Chaos deals with Jack Ruby and stuff as well at some point. Like, I wonder if he will eventually make his way back to JFK.
It'd be interesting if he did. It'd be really interesting if he did. Oh, to get to the end of your question, though, about what took conspiracy theory off the air.
Yes.
It was interesting because The second season, we delved into a lot of, like, the first season was just kind of the getting to know you season. So True TV was an interesting channel that picked up that show. Because I don't think they ever really realized what they bought. I think they kind of saw the surface level of, ex-wrestler Governor Jesse talking to people in tinfoil hats. I think that's kind of what they had envisioned in their head.
Yeah.
And hunting
They thought it'd be
Bigfoot.
more like a circus kind of thing.
Yeah, hunting Bigfoot in the woods and talking to tinfoil hats, but that's not Jesse, So the first season was kind of the getting to know you season, so we picked some interesting, bits there. The second season was when we were like, and we had great ratings. So the second season was when we were like, okay, we're going to hit 9/11, we're going to hit JFK, we're going to hit police state, we're going to hit the financial 2008, we're going to hit the fresh water, the corporate takeover, oligarch control of fresh water aquifers. We're hitting a lot of really heavy duty shit in that second season that a lot of people would be like, ooh, damn, that got on TV. And so when they came back to do the third season, it was interesting because, you could tell the network execs were like, hey, could you guys go back to like more wacky shit? Because your lead-in show...
But the ratings weren't bad, right?
Oh, the ratings were great.
So then why...
The ratings were great.
What reason did they give you for that? Why you should do that?
Part of my mind would be like, ooh, were they getting pressure? Or the other part of my mind is... These were people who, in their other shows on the network, were, hey, let's have, like, pardon the term, we want to show clip shows of like rednecks falling off trailers while peeing themselves, and so you can all laugh.
Like easy reality TV stuff.
Yeah, really bad reality TV cheesy shit, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that, like, oh God, come on, And so I don't think like there was necessarily a intelligence and programming level there that really understood what we were trying to do. And I think when they when we drifted from what their imagination of like the wacky shit they were hoping for, I think that's when they're kind of like, I don't know what to do with this. Even though we're getting good ratings, it doesn't match anything else that we're doing. And we're not that network. We're in make a quick buck, buy some goofy footage of people hurting themselves, or make actors do shit, pay actors to pretend to be real people to do like weird shit. That was their programming denominator. And so while part of my brain is like, did they get pressure? Maybe. In reality, from just looking at it through my lens of what I saw there, I think it was just a network who didn't know what they had and then wanted us to go more crazy with the last season. Which we looked at it like, hey, every show we do, the point is Jesse doesn't have to buy into it. He had a great show about the shape-shifting reptilian conspiracy where he confronted David Icke and called him out on his bullshit, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
So like there was like those things too where we're kind of like, okay, if you want us to do crazy shit, you got to be ready. Jesse's not going to be like, yeah, this is true. No, he's going to go after people who he believes is talking nonsense, and especially if he believes that they're bilking people out of money to talk nonsense. Which that's why he really doesn't like David Icke.
Is that does Icke? How does he raise? Does he raise money from people somehow? Like a
he has big
televangelist
speaking engagements and like all of that, and buy my book, buy my that, shape shifting 12-foot tall reptiles are eating our fear and running the world, which to me is also very dangerous because, if I want to get serious about it, what's dangerous about certain rabbit holes of conspiracy theories that people go down is you have to, the moment that you alleviate the human element and want to say that it's some fantastical force or something that's beyond our control, the danger with that is that you're now influencing people to believe that they don't really have an ability to change things. If I'm saying, okay, my government is corrupt, I need to be a better citizen and either vote for people who will undo that corruption or protest against that or, petition and fight to get laws passed or fight for the truth. If I'm fighting a human enemy, I can make those changes. I can accomplish those changes. If I'm being told that the reason our government is corrupt is because it's phantasmical beings from another world or from an alternate dimension who are reptilian and drinking my blood. You know, that takes away your ability to change things. Do you follow kind of where I'm going with that?
I mean,
you know?
there are two actual, C. Wright Mills wrote about this, the two ideal types of like sort of understanding history, and you could say understanding politics. The two ideal types that are both not good, and one of them sees everything as basically structure. You know, so you take a capitalist, a critic of capitalism could arrive at about the same place, because if you really do think that, well, capitalism and the class structure are so overdetermining that nothing that anybody actually does matters, there's no agency that anyone has, then you get to that point of like total powerlessness. Likewise, if you believe that it's like unseen, omnipotent, conspiratorial people that are really responsible for making history, then you're in about the same position where it's well, then you can't. They're too powerful.
I'm never
the
going to win
structure's
this
too
battle.
powerful, or the conspirators are too powerful.
Yeah,
and
and I
neither
think
is perfect in that
no,
way.
and I think what the danger of going down those roads in your thinking is that you're taking away the very basic truth of government and institutions in society, is that these institutions are still ultimately run by people. They're run by human beings, and human beings can be both diabolically evil and wonderfully good. And if you know that your friends and neighbors are the people that are making these decisions, it makes it much more. You can understand that you can change societies and you can change how this is going, and that it's not just fuck it, we're all doomed, throw up our hands, we're never going to win. You know, societies change, governments change. Human history teaches us that. That's why I have a lot of hope.
Every terrible organization and empire eventually
always falls,
goes down, and that will be the case for the U.S. As well. And with U.S., you have to go back centuries to a time when there weren't basically white people as the most powerful force in the world. I mean, this goes really Columbus, around that time period when we start going to the New World. I say we, but like I don't exactly think of myself on this team, but I can't but think that way, because we are, you know, you and I are both white guys living in a place where white people did not appear in a natural or peaceful way. It took a lot of, you know, genocide and everything else, as we know. But this that's changing is centuries of. So if you think the conspirators are all powerful, they're not. They seem to be losing. Although some people want to come up with other conspiracy theories for that. They want to say like, oh no, the multipolar world is a international law. These are all part of the globalist plan to contaminate our precious bodily fluids and such. I mean, there's that aspect too. There's other groups out there, and it's
look, you know, it's interesting because it's like at some point you have to always question. You know, I always go back to this. What are the motivations behind what people are telling you? And asking you to believe, or asking you to fight for, or asking you not to fight for. And you have to always ask yourself those motivations. And there's a certain truth that I found in all my adventures in looking at the worlds of conspiracies. There's a lot of really great, talented people and dedicated people who are truly trying to uncover wrongdoing, uncover truths that people need to know about, so that history doesn't repeat itself, so that you can change the world for the better. State crimes, genocides, all of these things. There's also a group of people out there who may have started doing that, but then realized, because they're human, that there's a lot of money to be made from manipulating, you know, from people who are afraid and paranoid. And so they will now base their career on keeping people afraid and paranoid, because it keeps feeding them money. It puts food on their table. And whatever maybe good intentions they had to start off with what they were trying to do and uncover has now just become a cottage industry for them to continue to make money off people. And they don't want they don't want society to get better and these things to be dismantled, because they have to keep a big bad out there. They have to keep telling you, oh, well, society's never going to get better because now it's going to be this. Now it's going to be this. Now it's going to be this. And we have to keep you constantly afraid because you keep giving us money, which is no different than how the military industrial complex works. It's no different than how a lot of these other things work. We keep you scared and afraid because that's the easiest way to manipulate and control you.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how a multipolar world, which is going to definitely have to come if they're going to actually just try to solve problems internationally, if we can get to that point and work together, or if they're going to look to perpetuate this. I hope that there is not the long Cold War that people predict between China and Russia and the U.S., which would potentially get hot. I hope that
I hope that never
people
happens.
realize that this is not the way to go.
I think
the media might play a role in this, because I feel like they can't trick people very easily anymore. I don't think people believe whatever the U.S. is saying about Yemen and Gaza and Iraq and Syria. And why are we in Syria again? I mean, I think
I think we're in a really brilliant moment in time, because probably now more than ever in human history, because of how we've broken through all of these barriers of communication, that you now have the ability for anybody on the planet to take their phone or take a camera or whatever and say, okay, here, I can show you real time what's happening. We've never really had that before, and I can show you real time. I can upload it to this and you can see it right now. Right. Now there's a lot of movements to try to tamper that down and get rid of that freedom and ability. And I think we definitely need to guard against that. And we definitely need to pay attention to those efforts to censor our ability to communicate freely in this new world of communication. And the reason that that's happening is because, to what you were saying, now more than ever, we are a global community, whether you like it or not, because we can communicate globally to each other as people at any given time of the day, at any hour. That's never happened before in human history, ever. So there's going to be a lot of growing pains with that. There's going to be a lot of mistakes made. There's going to be a lot of pain that's going to come from adapting to that new way of how we communicate with each other. You don't answer that by, declaring, oh, well, we need a, lack of better term, one world government. No. But if anything, it'll help us kind of solidify why we do need the First Amendment across the globe, why we do need basic respect of basic, individual rights and things of that nature. Yeah. We know what the answers are. We know the good way that can go, and now projecting that across the world, because we are, look, at the end of the day, we are a global, we're one, we're human beings, we're one species. We are all brothers and sisters. We all share the same backgrounds, the same thing. Our experiences are all different, but at the end of the day, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all part of the same family, and we have to accept that and really enjoy that about each other.
Right. And I think that this, the four freedoms that Roosevelt promises, and Henry Wallace, the vice president, says it should be a century of the common man. And the Wall Street oligarchs, they basically were like, no, we don't want that. We're not going to try to make a world where the people have freedom from want and freedom of religious expression and freedom from fear and all these things, all the four freedoms that Roosevelt promised. And Kennedy, I think, was basically saying, like, we should really, what Kennedy was doing was going back to like Henry Wallace and trying to let's have international cooperation. Let's not try to rule the world. And they said, like, no, actually, we are going to keep doing this. And so they did, and they have. And now we're seeing that, like, okay, you didn't change course then. You didn't change course at the end of World War II. You went for empire, okay? And then you had a do-over, a chance with Kennedy, and you said, no, we're just going to go worse. We're going to kill Kennedy, and we're going to kill millions in Indonesia and Vietnam and everywhere else. And they had a chance at the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev was suggesting something much more along the lines of what Kennedy and Wallace were saying, and they didn't go for that. They wanted to go for global dominance. And now we see where it's gotten them. It's gotten us, and they're running out of the ability to. There's no fix for them to go back, and this is why I think this time period is so amazing.
Yeah, it really is, and I think that as dark as it feels at times, when you look around and you're seeing Ukraine, Gaza, the attack on civil liberties, the continued attack and destruction of civil liberties here at home, the wealth gap that's developing, all of these things. I I'm not Pollyanna. Those are very real things that we have to confront and that we have to change. And it is very dark times. At the same time, however, I do believe that when I look at the youth today, when I look at the global youth today, not just U.S. youth, I do have a lot of hope. I do see the fact that we are, when you see people saying, hey, what's happening in Gaza is wrong, what's happening in Yemen is wrong, and you hear it echoed across the globe. I don't know if you'd have seen that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Maybe, but not in the way that you're seeing it today, I don't think. And when you see people so acutely aware of how, as you mentioned, the bank system and the oligarch system is keeping people down. Like everybody knows that now. It's no longer like people have seen through the bullshit, to a pretty good degree. I mean, that's how you get figures like Donald Trump is because people feel and can see the corruption and can see the bullshit. The downside of that is because we don't necessarily have a lot of leaders stepping up to kind of offset that. We do, but they're not, that's where,
they
you
lie.
can get these
Obama says change you can believe in, and then continuity.
Oh, that broke my heart. The moment that Obama wouldn't prosecute torture and said we have to look forward and not backward, I was like, that's come on, man. It's one of those. I have friends. It's gonna make me sound really elitist. I have friends who have a home on Martha's Vineyard that I go and visit them from time to time, and like in my mind, I'm like, just give me a moment where I walk into a place and I see Obama sitting in the back, a little bit like tipsy, so I can walk up and be like, hey, let's start a conversation. So drone assassination program, how do you live with your, how do you justify that? That's never going to happen. But in our dreams, we wish we could kind of confront people who claimed to be good people, and maybe in their hearts they are, but how do you then justify X, Y, and Z? Walking through that,
That's, the alternative, I think, is in his, he said this himself. He told this to some donors. He said, I don't want to end up like MLK. So what do you think? I'm going to go out there and do all this crazy shit you're suggesting, fix problems and get killed? No, thanks.
And that's
I'd
the problem.
Chill in my mansion in Martha's Vineyard.
And that's
it's a big carrot and it's a big stick that they have.
It is. And look, I get it. Nobody wants to rock their own boat. If you got the big carrot sitting in front of you and you look at the timeline of your life and you look at your children's lives and say, okay, well, can I just grab that now and move forward, or can I, or maybe I can do enough good over here to offset the bad I do here?
I think that they make all kinds of bullshit things like that. Obama probably thinks it was great that I didn't go into Syria, even though I authorized, McJihad to go in there and chop off all those heads. I was the good guy because I didn't send in the military like Bush. I mean, I think he probably thinks that.
And it's sad. And so it's like when I look at politics today and I see, wow, we have probably the two worst choices. I mean, maybe it's debatable. You get me a presidential scholar on here and they'll come up with some other names from like way back in the day that I'll be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, no, I see that. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson. Okay,
Biden's presidency has been worse than Trump's. I'm sorry. Yeah, and I'm not saying that because I'm saying Trump is better. I'm just saying Gaza and Ukraine are worse than anything Trump did. As terrible as Trump is,
internationally, yes. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, and let's not. That's my thing too. It's like it's so sad when you see people who are so polarized into their kind of political belief systems, where it's like, Biden's doing all this horrible shit, which I agree with you on, and then Trump didn't do that. Well, no, Trump bombed the fuck out of a lot of places.
He did other terrible things. I'm not. Yeah. He killed someone. No,
you're not.
He's a murderer. He's a murderer.
You're not saying that, but it's like whenever you get into those conversations with people when they've already picked their winner, it's kind of like, dude, don't gloss over your own side's bullshit. Like, let's.
In this case, it's my side. I can't even. I couldn't even imagine voting for either of them at this point. And Kennedy has a chance, but I don't think he does unless he gets Israel right, and that is
it's tough.
A tricky thing. And I will say this about him. We'll say this about his family. They wanted to use the political system to solve as many of the most obvious and horrible, scary problems that there were, like the nuclear situation. That's what motivated JFK, and he did amazing things there compared to what other presidents had done. But the Kennedys, both of them, made a mistake in terms of they misjudged what you could do without and successfully. They got killed. we don't live in a real democracy. We live in a different kind of regime.
Yes.
And if you do too much that the regime will not tolerate, you will die.
Yes.
And so
I
it
agree.
seems that the most, as you look at it now, Israel seems to be the one issue that is like the orthodoxy, like the Cold War was the orthodoxy, like capitalism used to be an orthodoxy. Israel, because of their institutional power and the money of the Israel lobby, the fact that there's no beachheads really against them. Academia, you can't mess with them in academia. You'll end up like Norm Finkelstein. You can't be in the media. You'll end up like Mehdi Hassan, or you'll end up like Dennis Kucinich or Cynthia McKinney in the political system. Like it is you can't. It seems that they're very difficult to know how to confront.
Which is tragic because it goes again. Well, and all of that actually plays to a bigger issue that we're kind of grappling with in the U.S. right now, which is our ability to have political debate in this country outside of a very small window of what's acceptable. I am we have to be able to have the ability to say, hey, I don't believe in X, Y, and Z, and I can defend myself for that or not. Like, the free speech issues in this country are deep, and we're going through a time right now where we have to figure out how we're going to move forward with that because of the level of communication and things like that. And I've always been a person who believes I would rather have someone tell me the most fucked up things they believe in, so that way I know where they stand, than have them censor themselves, and not tell me, to where then they're behind the scenes orchestrating some heinous shit that then I don't know about what kind of character that person has, or that I could maybe then change their opinions on something, and the fact that as a country, we're in this place now where there's things that you can talk about, there's things you can't talk about. We have to get beyond that, because just because you talk about something doesn't necessarily mean you endorse something. Just because you want to have a debate about this doesn't necessarily mean that you're picking a side in that debate, or that kind of thing. It means that that's how you find answers. That's how you find solutions, is debating issues like Israel and Gaza, is debating issues like that, is hearing all sides of a story. That's the point. That's the point of a free thinking society, is that you have the ability to do that. Now, that doesn't shield you from the consequences of shitty viewpoints. Like, you can have a shitty viewpoint and that could have consequences to it. That's part of that's part of it. But we cannot allow the squashing of debate because one side is in charge and one side is not. And I'm not talking about Democrat and Republican here. I'm talking about on a much bigger scale than that. Because both sides are guilty. Like, let's be real. Both sides want to ban books. They don't like to say that, but they both sides of that spectrum want to ban political thought, whether it's from the other side or from a side that neither agree with or whatever, and I will never buy into that idea that, we need to censor political speech because it's dangerous.
Well, the real issue is that the oligarchy is losing its hegemony over society, and people are saying things like, hey, this oligarchy sucks, and why do these people have so much money that they shouldn't probably have, and they're dominating politics and society, and it sucks. And that seems to be the general thrust of the things, or they control foreign policy for these greedy reasons, and they're screwing us this way, and we don't like this, and they're a bunch of criminals, and then they're accurately being called criminals. And the oligarchy does not like that, because they would rather people not say that. It's not as if these free speech issues are new. They're not fundamentally different from when George Washington and everyone else, fought the war. But so the issue now, the reason that it is an issue is that the oligarchy is just unhappy with shit people are saying. Like down with the oligarchy in so many words, in different words. So this seems to be the heart of it. Now, Tyrel, I've kept you here longer than I had said I would, so I really am thankful for that. Can you tell us where people can follow your work, and whatever you can say about projects you're working on now, or if you can't say, I understand too. But
we've got a lot of good stuff coming up. It's been they can find all our work on Substack.com. Me and my father curate a page there called Die First Then Quit. You can find us on Substack there. We do a lot of writing. We do a lot of videos, podcasts, things of that nature, all kind of hubbed onto Die First Then Quit. We have some really exciting major things coming up in the next few months that are really close to Jesse's heart that we're about to get into. And I can't divulge it yet, but I promise that when that time comes, I'll come back on and we can talk all about it, because it is something that's both political as well as personal for Jesse. And it's something that he has fought for his whole life, that we're kind of putting into reality. And so that's a big thing that we're working on. Other than that, Jesse, the reason he picked the name Die First Then Quit is because in Jesse's mind, he's going to keep talking till the day he dies. And so, if you're a fan of Jesse Ventura and his beliefs, and you want to hear more about his opinion on things, as well as my own, Jeff, definitely check us out at Die First Then Quit. And obviously we have the social media pages and all of that as well on X and Facebook and things like that. But no, man, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. It's always good to have a great discussion about a lot of the different adventures that I've had. But it's also just fun to always have a great political discussion with you guys and keep up the great work for what you guys are doing. Big fan of yours, big fan of David Talbot. You're doing great work out there, and keep it up.
Well, thank you very much. I think you and your dad make a great father and son team. It's really cool what you guys are doing, and I'm excited to see what you have in the coming months. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. Visit ForDiedTrying.com and buy the prologue, now on Amazon. Keep your eye out for Chapter 1, which should be dropping any day now. Please do subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon for first access to all Devil's Chess Club episodes and for all new and past episodes of the American Exception podcast, including the Peter Dale Scott Oral History series. Check the show notes for a link to Jesse Ventura's Die First Then Quit and to Bryce's excellent new article at FAIR, Shielding U.S. Public from Israeli Reports of Friendly Fire on October 7, which we will probably talk about again on the next episode here. There is something that the world needs very urgently, and that would be statesmanship. Some statesmanship from the U.S., the imperial hegemon in winter. The world could easily solve these horrific wars in Gaza and Ukraine. These are ultimately wars fought for Western imperial objectives, but they are only serving to accelerate the end of centuries of Western global dominance. If a U.S. leader bows to reality and allows the world to come together to end these conflicts, we could begin a new era of increasingly peaceful internationalism with state sovereignty and international law as its foundations. Alternatively, the empire can choose to persist with its brinksmanship, going for broke on the devil's chessboard.